What's up, everyone? The more I read about history and learn about really successful or amazing people in our past, the more I realize how amazing and ridiculous people have been in the past and how many achievements they've accomplished, and how no one nowadays even gives a crap, cares, or knows anything about them. And there's so many people out there that you could ask anyone on the street, what's this man? And you give him a name and they won't know it. And I'm not talking the big names like George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, which, again, if you move outside the United States, I don't even think many people know it at that. But of course, each nation and country has its own history of successful people. Um, and so, I don't know, it really makes me think about what's really important. And I do think now that anyone who's trying to extend their name and their fame after they die so that uh, hundreds or thousands of years afterwards they still remember you, I don't think that's a good idea if you're doing it just for ego, just for that idea of remembrance. Because what I've found and observed, I mean, if you've watched enough of those Jimmy Kimmel Ask a Person on the Street about history videos on YouTube, you'll realize that 99% of people are pretty dumb and don't really care about history, don't really even know anything about these figures. And even these big ones like George Washington or Abraham Lincoln, they know close to nothing. And Lincoln's a man who he went through a lot of failures and a lot of stuff in his life. And nowadays, no one knows anything about him except that he wore a tall hat. He did some stuff with slavery, if you're lucky. And on top of that, he had a beard. When in fact he did shave his beard off. And even in the films, there recently was a released Lincoln film. Again, it only dramatizes one side to him, with the abolition of slavery, and it just tries and makes a picture of that. But even for him, his whole life was this huge adventurous story, which again I'm not expert in, but apparently I know that he went through a lot of failures. He ran for many positions politically on a local, state, national level, lost many times, and all this stuff happened where he kept failing. He did all these odd jobs. He got fired. All his whole life was a bunch of failures. And then he became president, and then boom, a civil war broke out. It was a huge thing, and then look at it now. He's like one of the most remembered presidents of the many that we have. And I think that's another good topic to consider. Think of United States presidents, and again, some of these people who watching are not from the United States. I don't want to exclude them because they have their own personal history and with their own country. But I'm using this as an example, and again, it can be used for other things just to show you how unfortunate it is that many things are lost, and most people don't really care. So for these presidents, at least, there's so many of them, and yet most people cannot even recite their names. I can't either, but it's just remarkable how certain presidents have done so much. There's this one president. There's this video I just watched on YouTube. It's called "4 Badass Presidents That Could Have Their Own Movie and Blow Away Any Recent Blockbuster Movie." It's something like that. The name might be slightly different from what I just said. But basically, it just goes through 4 presidents, and it just shows the ridiculous stuff they've done in their life that's crazier than any sort of movie that's released nowadays. there's this one president, he did a lot of stuff. He was involved in this corrupt organization. That whole thing got eliminated. Then he became president, and then he decided to abolish that whole thing, even though he could have just kept it and made a lot of money off of it. And it's funny because in the preface of that video, there's actually a statement where it says, I could list numerous presidents, 25, that have done amazing things in history, but no one would watch a YouTube video like that. So I distilled it down to 4, which is just a very sad thing also. So today I'm going to talk to you guys very briefly about some of these interesting people in our history. I'm sure there's countless others, hundreds, thousands of others who have gone and done ridiculous things in wars, battles, thrown ridiculous weapons, battled, and done some amazing things against other humans in war, or in government, or in advancement of knowledge that I haven't heard about yet, but I'm sure it's there. And it's kind of sad that a lot of it's probably not documented in history. We probably never heard about some of the great wars or fights. Not that wars or fights are ever good, but some of the great tactical, strategic plans that have been made, and ridiculous, amazing combat tactics and fighting stances, and just fighting phases that have occurred in history. I'm sure there's been so many weapons and so many different battles that no one's ever really captured and found out about. But today I'm not going to be talking about wars or battles. I will be focusing on mathematics. And again, it's funny because the people I'm going to mention, most of them, I'm pretty sure 100% of the viewers have never heard of. And again, it just illustrates this whole idea. Like, I do think that achieving any sort of fame for ego to be remembered for generations in the future is somewhat pointless, as illustrated by these people. To be remembered at all, I mean, that's not a horrible thing by your loved ones, that you made a great impact on the world. That's a different topic and story, and I'm not opposed to that at all. Nor am I opposed to someone like Bill Gates, who is spending most of his money, his billions of dollars, on fighting malaria and these specific diseases that are affecting us globally. And he doesn't care at all whether he is renowned throughout history after he dies about it. He just wants to eliminate this, and you can see this through how his actions, his behaviors, and how he talks about this stuff. So he's not doing it to be remembered. He's doing it just to make the world a better place. Whether or not he gets remembered, that's a different story. Mother Teresa is a different story. But we'll be talking about mathematics today. So I'm going through this book, Against the Gods. I was kind of scared about reading this because it sounded just so old. I knew already that it was about like risk and return and history and mathematics. And I was just very scared because I've gone through some books that require a lot of thinking, and then even then you can't comprehend it because the math flies over your head or something like that. So far, I think I'm about a quarter way through, and I love it so far. And it's very surprising because, one, you think it's some old book and it's modern. It mentions Microsoft and all this other stuff. Two, it's an easy read and very quick in terms of talking about stuff. Like it never really goes into any deep mathematics or anything, really, which at least so far. And it's just like it just flows through. It's very easy, and it's just like a light history on topic so far, which is so nice, and it's very thought-provoking. And so there's these people mentioned in the book so far, and you can just tell that they have played enormous roles in the advancement of mathematics, specifically risk and return, and the mathematics behind probability, which, according to the book, the narration, the narrator is pretty much saying that without these mathematical advancements, we would still be uh, almost prehistoric, Agrian, living very much uh, dependent on the land and nature. And all these advancements, anything you could think of, Microsoft, um, I guess you could say uh, airplanes, spaceships, technology, anything. And again, I feel like there's a little bit of bias, a little bit of pride in what he's saying, a little bit of overgeneralizing. He's saying none of this would have been possible without these mathematical probabilities. Like technically, it's true, you know, because one thing he throws out is that, well, if you can't quantify things, then you can't get capital, all this stuff. But I think he's generalizing things. It's kind of like the physics professor who says physics is central to everything and it's the best subject ever. Well, you can say that with a lot of subjects, and I've gone through a lot of teachers of different subjects who have said that for chemistry, biology, math, engineering, you can say for English, writing, but generally it's some sort of science or mathematics, or chemistry professor who has this overgeneralizing thing. It's without chemistry, nothing's possible. Therefore, chemistry is the best thing. I don't know. Everything's important in certain ways. Anyhow, off that rant. It's a great topic, and I just want to briefly go over these people. One's Pascal. He has accomplished a lot, and apparently he was a child prodigy, and he invented all these things, all these mathematical probability things. Then he became a religious zealot, abandoned rationality in favor of religion, and because his religion, his strain said that any sort of reasoning was evil, and the only truth to salvation was through abandoning reasoning and just living in I guess you could say asceticism, or just suffering now, poverty. And so it's a very interesting story. There came a point where he was advised by professionals at the time to switch back to his pleasure-seeking ways of gambling and thinking about probability and mathematics, because he was just so paralyzed in his religious state about the sheer vastness of the world and how and why, and philosophically what's the reason he was placed there and all this stuff. And then, you know, it talks briefly about the certain mathematical probability things and risk that are very applicable to modern society now, and the foundations of which everything is built. I think that's one thing that most people take for granted. Mathematics is a great example. Everything that you learn is built off a history of discovery. Every little thing, every foundation, algebra, linear, quadratic formulas, are all something that took a lifetimes of work of many geniuses in mathematics to come across. And again, none of these people are really honored or really care, or no one even really cares about them or knows about them. Same thing with a lot of Nobel Prize winners and a lot of other stuff, which is kind of sad, really. If you ask anyone off the street randomly, 99 out of 100, or maybe 999 out of 100 wouldn't say or know anything about them. And then there's this other man. I think his last name is Cardona. He was around 500 years ago, and this man was ridiculous in his own right. He had all sorts of I should say personality flaws, physical flaws as well. He enjoyed his pleasures a lot, and he enjoyed women and a lot of stuff, gambling, all this stuff. But he was also very mathematically advanced for his age. His writings on probability were not discovered for another century at least, or half century, by other mathematicians. And it was said, at least in a book, that his discoveries, if discovered sooner, even though they were discovered later, they advanced mathematics tremendously. In addition to that, he wrote a few books that I have put on my wish list to read one day. They're written in Latin, I believe, or German, but translated over. And there's this one that's an autobiography, and apparently the first official autobiography released in history. I don't know if that's true, but that's what's stated in this book. And it's crazy, you know. Apparently he's done all these crazy stuff in his life, and other stuff with his social life, with women, not just mathematically, but he put it all into this autobiography. And yeah, and then boom, no one really knows about him. So Pascal's a name that most people have probably heard of somewhat. Pascal's formula, that sort of stuff, Pascal's triangle, are still mentioned in school. But it's funny, the book also mentions a lot about the discoveries and the people behind algebra and just general algebra and general formulas like linear, quadratic, and it's just amazing. Pascal himself was a prodigy in mathematics. He discovered a lot on his own just by using geometry and looking at the floor pan, the tiles on the floor of his home, I believe. And he did a lot of crazy stuff. And it's interesting just to read this book, Against the Gods, because they describe like how mathematics can be interpreted in different ways to achieve these solutions. Because these mathematicians were doing all this stuff to figure out these problems in probability that had been undiscovered or unsolved for years. And Pascal took a very geometric approach to mapping out all the algebra and possible solutions to a probability problem, and go on to help solve this solution through Pascal's triangle. And another mathematician who was helping him went a whole different way to try and solve it, by just pure algebra, no geometry whatsoever. So it's interesting how that works. Anyhow, that's all we want to say in a nutshell, and it's all very interesting. Again, check out my book review channel. If you want to see the full book review, summary, discussion on Against the Gods once I finish it, you can find that link to my book review channel on my About section on this channel. Just hit my name below, Will You Laugh, which will take you to my channel. Hit the About section, and that has all links, including the link to my book review channel. It's very interesting. I'll release that once I finish Against the Gods. Again, it's just so much in life that you don't have enough time to just absorb. And it's very much interesting. Pascal was a very interesting man. And there's certain stuff on probability that I'm quite embarrassed. Not really embarrassed, but it just, like, if you guys are assuming I'm some sort of super smart, intelligent person, probably biased because you notice I'm Asian, that's not true, because there's some fairly simple probability things, just to demonstrate, that I have no idea how to solve. Apparently it was mentioned that if you have like a 6-sided die, after the fourth roll of the die, you have a higher than 50% chance of rolling a specific number. And that didn't really make sense to me. I tried to quantify it, but apparently this was used and exploited by one of Pascal's mathematician co-mates to profit in I think Paris's gambling area, because this mathematician had mapped it out and figured out that there's a higher than 50% chance, and so he would just gamble in large volume, which would require a lot of money, because you lose a lot, but then you gain it all back after a while, because you had a slight edge over 50%, but everyone else didn't do the math because it was very complicated, and they just thought it was just pure luck. And then there's another probability thing that like what is like one of the huge questions, at least in the first. It's one of the huge